Welcome everybody to our special council meeting here today, and I would like to remind people that the East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. No other person has the right to record council meetings unless approval has been granted by the chair. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. And councillors, I'd like to remind you to make sure that your microphone is turned on when you are addressing the gallery. Members of the public wishing to speak we will ensure that the microphone is turned on for you. So on behalf of Council, I would like to acknowledge the Gunai Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders both past and present. And Mr CEO, do we have any apologies?
None have been received, Mr Mayor.
I'd like to say Councillor O'Connell and Councillor Roberts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. It's duly noted. Declarations of conflict of interest.
None have been received, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Our next meeting, our ordinary council meeting, Tuesday 3rd of March 2020, to be held at the Corporate Centre, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. So our first item is our election period policy. So if we could have our officers address this item. Thank you, Mr Cannizaro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You will. I'm speaking to item number 2, election period policy. The Local Government Act, Section 93B, requires Council to adopt an election period policy. We have already an election period policy in place. I present to you today an updated version of the election period policy. The policy has been updated for, I would say, minimal administrative changes such as job title changes in terms of the restructure and converting the old policy template into the new council adopted policy template. I take the report as read and I'm happy to field the questions, and the recommendation is that council adopts the East Gippsland Shire Council election period policy as noted in Appendix 1.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Peltz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Peter, with regards to this policy, I know that there's just minuscule changes from the previous one. It's word festing, basically. With what I went to on Friday last week, I went to a rural council's meeting and it was raised there that the Victorian Local Government Association is actually changing or recommending some further changes to policies, and was hoping that this could be amended should those policies come to fruition, and it would be required for us to adopt it. So I dare say this is probably not the first time we see this, but there was a few things. So I was asking whether this can still be amended at a later date. Thank you.
Certainly if there are any changes that fall out of that, we will provide an update and present that to Council for another resolution.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? All right, we have no more questions. Councillor Peltz, you wish to move this?
Yes, I'm happy to move this recommendation. What I was alluding to in my questioning was... I need a seconder.
Councillor Rotino, thank you. Now, Councillor Peltz, you may speak to it.
Yes, what I was alluding to in my question to Mr Cannizaro was something that was raised at rural councils last week with implementations to prospective candidates and some upskilling that they may need to go through prior to the election period, should that come to fruition, was something that is speculative at this stage, but not to say it may be an important addition to this policy moving forward. So we'll still wait and hear, but it may not come to a part. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Councillor Rotino, would anyone else wish to speak for or against? All right, we will go to the vote. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. We'll go to item 3. Also, this is another review of our organisation, and so we have Ms Collins presenting. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, I'll start. Thank you. Councillors, I speak to report number 3, review of the organisation's operations. You will recall at an ordinary meeting back in June 2019, Council reviewed its 2019 budget, and in addition to that, Council resolved to request the CEO to review the organisation's operations with an objective of achieving ongoing net saving of $1.5 million for the 2020-21 financial year, and that the CEO reports back to Council by December 2019 with a recommendation on how this outcome can be achieved. The report is details Appendix 1, a series of identified potential cost savings that the CEO has put forward. It also provides specifics around the 12 or so items that are in Appendix 1 that identify specific areas. The recommendation that is presented to Council is that Council notes the review of the organisation's operations has been completed with identified potential cost savings of $1.5 million for financial year 2020-21. That the recommendation, point number 2, determines that the use of any identified cost savings during the Council budget planning process be worked through during that Council budget planning process for the 2021 financial year. That's the recommendation. I'm happy to field some questions.
Councillor Rotino.
Thank you, Peter, for that report. Just in relation to this particular report, it's for noting, obviously, the landscape in East Gippsland's changed dramatically from when we first moved that motion. And my understanding, this report was for noting, and then it will become part of our budgetary process this year. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the potential cost savings were struck as at 31st of December 2019. So as you quite rightly allude, circumstances have changed.
Councillor Ellis.
I can draw your attention to the recommendation before Councillor Mr Cannizzaro. The second point refers to determining that the recommendations in Appendix 1 would be followed through. Determines means to meet, to cause to be enacted. So regardless of how the circumstances have changed, I put it to you that we're obliged to adopt the recommendations that are put in this report.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Cannizzaro. Sorry, Mr Cannizzaro, could
not-
you be... It's
thank
not
you,
a
Mr. Mayor.
promotion, by the way.
That's an aspiration, thank you. Certainly, the first recommendation is a noting of the officer's recommendations. But point 2 is about determining how to use any identified cost savings during the council budget planning process. So part 1 is about noting that the CEO has completed what was asked of him as per council resolution on the 25th of June 2019. So that is a report that has come back to council in December 2019 and again in February 2020. Item number 2 of the recommendation is about determine the use of any identified cost savings during the council budget planning process. So take the identified cost savings, and if they're still valid, given the changed circumstances, then during the planning process we would determine, as a council, we, meaning council, would determine the use of any identified cost savings.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Buckley's got a question.
In this cessation of council rebate, where there is an existing state government rebate provided, is that the one to do with the pensions, the pensioner rebate?
That could be one, yes.
Keeping in mind that the pensions are granted by the Commonwealth, not the state. Here it says the state government rebate. So could I have a clarification on that, please?
Ms Collins.
Councillor Buckley, the state government provides a rebate for eligible ratepayers who are in receipt of, there's a criteria, but primarily the aged pension. So it's just the eligibility criteria, which is obviously through a federal process, but the state provide the pension rebate currently for rates for those eligible pensioners. The amount that's listed in that list of potential savings is the $55 per eligible recipient that council provides in addition to the state government rebate for rates. So it's not about the state government pension rebate, it's about the council's rebate to those pensioners.
That leads to another question. That rebate provided by the council then, is that repaid to the Commonwealth in lieu of the pension?
No, that's just a cost to council of about $380,000 a year. We just provide it, that's just an expense. To the other ratepayers, we provide an additional $50 or $55 rebate to those eligible pensioners on top of the state government rebate. So it's just a cost to council.
With another question, but it just doesn't seem to make sense to me, because the origin of the pension is the federal government. Well, not the federal government, but the federal system.
This is, and if you look in council's rating strategy, specifically, it's a rebate that council provides itself on top of any state government rebate to eligible ratepayers, which are those aged pensioners primarily, and council provides another contribution towards paying their rates. So it's just purely an expense to council. It's our own rebate. Nothing to do with state, nothing to do with federal. It's absolutely within the control of this council, that particular rebate.
Just another one then. Does it mean that the pensioner doesn't get the rebate? Does it still mean that the pensioners get this rebate? Does it mean correction?
Eligible pensioners would still receive the state government pension rebate. that doesn't change. This is about the council rebate only. So it's the council $55 additional rebate, which is provided to those eligible ratepayers. So they still receive their state government pension rebate. Doesn't change that.
But the pensioner is still 55, whatever it is, $55 short when he comes in and pays his rates, or he, maybe a she, because they pay rates too. They've still got to find that extra $55. Yes. Is that the case?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. That would be the case if council, it's about council supporting or not supporting the proposal that's put forward. That is just one suggestion that the CEO, through the review, has put forward for council to consider in terms of their ongoing savings. And it's totally at council's discretion then what they may decide in terms of what the CEO has proposed. So it's totally within the council's decision-making process.
Thank you, Ms Collins. We have a question from Councillor Peltz.
Yes, I have too, but I'll just try and help Councillor Buckley understand that, and you might answer this for me with regards to Councillor Buckley's question. But it's my understanding that it would be the self-funded retirees that would actually miss out, because they are actually then the ones having to find the $55 additional. No. Okay. I've read it wrong.
The council rebate is only provided to the eligible pensioners that are eligible age pensioners that are approved by the federal and then the state government who check those. So they are the eligible age pensioners. So those people who are just on full pensions. So the self-funded retiree would not be eligible for anything. They don't get any pension rebate at all, either from the state or from council.
Okay, thank you. My next question, if I may, with regards to the noting of what's been listed for approval or for the cost savings of the 1.5 million, given the light of the bushfires and how we're actually, the legacy of the bushfires and additional expenses and things that are actually surfacing, I'm sort of curious as to whether this is relevant now, because the whole ball game's changed and the budget's sort of previous budget and the ideologies of it have actually gone out the window. So for me, what are the implications of us actually sticking to this, and if we let it go, does it work easier, or is it more constructive for our budgeting department? And yeah.
Mr Cannizzaro.
Mr Mayor. So recommendation 1 is about noting that the CEO has completed the
Yes.
work.
I understand that.
And then as we move into the 2020-21 budget process, that's where the opportunity arises to identify cost savings, but potentially, given the circumstances, it may be an increase in costs as well that we might have to bring back to council. So I think that's the process that best explains it, Councillor Peltz.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, you've got a question.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's just a quick one to Ms Collins. Just to clarify, this idea of taking away the councillor rebate didn't come from the CEO, it came from Councillor Rees and Rotino when we workshopped.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. What's the relevance here? What's the relevance? We're not. This report's for noting. It's going to our budget. Like, what's the point of making that comment? It's ridiculous.
Just that
If I can
point
reply,
noted, but
we're not in
could you
debate,
please...
so there's no
so
point
just,
of order, may I suggest?
just if you could just ask a question, Councillor Ellis, too. I'm just going to actually ask for a clarification from Mr Cannizzaro. At the moment, we are not, as I understand it, we are not voting on any definitive issue. It is just down the down the track that we will be discussing this possible $1.5 million in savings, but we are not voting on anything concrete at this stage. Could you please clarify that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You will be resolving recommendations that are presented, or you may wish to make an amendment, obviously. But again, I restate that the first recommendation is about noting that the work has been completed. The second point of recommendation is, as we move into the budget planning process, that's the opportunity to determine best use of our budget, and obviously noting the circumstances have changed with the bushfire event. I dare say that our expenditure budget may be very different to what we first thought in the first half of 2019/20 financial year.
Thank you for that, because there's certainly been lots of consternation around this pensioner rebate, but it is not at this stage relevant in this voting on this item. So if there's no further discussion,
I'd like to flag an alternative recommendation, an alternative motion, if I may, and the motion will be as stands but without dot point 2, so it just says that we note the CEO's has delivered, and I think that's sufficient enough to move this forward as an amendment. Thank you.
do we have somebody to second this amendment?
It's just taking a dot point out.
So, just, well, firstly, we can't ask questions. We have nobody to second this amendment. So,
Taking the complexity of the dot points out.
Mr Mayor, if
Well,
there's
I would just
no
say if
seconder,
there's no
I'm happy to move the motion.
well, so,
I'll second it, Mr Mayor.
so Councillor Reeves, you're prepared. You're seconding, Councillor. Sorry, we've got ahead. There is nobody to second Councillor Peltz's alternative, so that has lapsed. So, councillors, please. So we'll go back to the original motion, and Councillor Rutino has moved this, and Councillor Reeves has seconded it. So would you like to speak to the Councillor Rutino?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As has been explained, the first point is for noting this report. The rest of it is, it goes back into the fold of our budget process this year, whether there's discussions about pensioner rebates, split rates, whatever the discussions are, is a budget process. Now, to try and identify certain things, it's just a cheap shot and unnecessary, and I'm just supporting this recommendation as I did on the night when it was originally moved. There's no issue. The report's for noting, so we're re-noting it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Reeves, you wish to comment? You seconded the motion.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillors, once again, we're not making a decision about any of the proposed changes in that attachment. We're saying that we will take those discussions to the budget process, and that's where we'll decide it. So that's the place. So to get tied up around whatever those savings are at the moment, that's not what we're deciding. Let's take it to the budget, and that's the right place. And back to the original recommendation, yes, and well done to the CEO. We set him a task to actually identify that work, do the work, deliver it in December last year, and provide those options for us to make a decision on in the budgetary process. That's what we're doing, and once again, I support that.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Ellis put his hand up first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak against this particular motion. I'm particularly concerned about point 2 of the matter and refer to the definition of determines, which directs us as a determined that is cause to occur, that council during the council budgeting planning process, identifying these costs. Now, when we look at the briefing sheet, it was very vague and it didn't show what the true issue was involved. And I draw your attention to the different words stating in page 6 of the notes, the key areas of expenditure that have been proposed to deliver these cost savings include cessation of any council rebate and where there is an existing state rebate provided. Now, that's a bit of cover up for what we were debating as points of it. That's why the issue of the pensions was mentioned, taking away the pensioner subsidy that we provide as a council. It also could mean that we could look at other subsidies, perhaps to the farmers community or to other sections of our community, and if they're in receipt of any particular subsidy, have those sort of assistance packages taken away. It is a matter of a concern. I'm happy that the matter's been brought back for noting at point 1, as I say, but I'm concerned that point 2 is an action that we have to take into consideration and act upon in the process of determining the budget, when I see that that's unnecessary at this point in time, particularly on the words of everyone around this table. So I object to this particular matter and am concerned for the pensioners and others in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz, you had a question? Oh, sorry, you wish to speak?
I wish to speak against it. I won't be supporting this motion. Also, as concurred with Councillor Ellis here, I feel his meanings, but also I'd like to say it's also irrelevant, almost an irrelevant document now on the basis that dot point 2, the assets of the average annual maintenance cost required for bridges will result in an average annual reduction in budget required to the value of $700,000, and it is proposed that 50% of this annual savings be reallocated to capital to increase the capacity to complete the replacement of the remaining timber bridges. Well, we've lost most of them. We've lost 17 bridges in the bushfires, and I feel that this is no longer relevant, and hence the result will deliver a net operations savings of $350,000, which now is not relevant because we actually need to spend that money and be able to replace those assets. So to me, I feel that this is something that's may have been relevant in December, but in January and February now, it's definitely not relevant, so I won't be supporting the... But I would like to make note that the first dot point of asking our CEO to do this task, and I'd like to say he's done a great job in looking for it and finding that cost savings, and I'd like to commend him publicly on that, because he's done and completed, and his staff, what we'd asked them to do. But for me, the opportunity has gone by the wayside and our situation has changed. So I would like to note it, but I won't be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Have any more speakers? Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Speaking for or against?
I'm speaking for the recommendation. Clearly, point 2 states determines the use of any identified cost savings. Determining the use means that we will determine whether we will use the listed cost savings or not. That's exactly what it means, and that will be the subject of discussion once we get to the budget planning process, and we will determine whether we use those suggestions or not. They are suggestions, that's all they are, and I would support this recommendation.
Well, if we have no further speakers, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's already been stated, and I think in a lot of ways we probably all agree that we've noted a really good piece of work that our CEO has done. When I actually moved that motion, so I know exactly the wording of it, we didn't tell him or instruct him what things to look at. We asked him to identify $1.5 million worth of savings. Nothing was off the table, and he's done that job. Now, part of our role, the environment around us has changed significantly. So part of any good budgeting process, the first thing we'll do is do an environmental scan to see what things we need to take into consideration for this year's budget and next year's budget and the budget after that and for 10 years out. And we'll look at all the opportunities, we'll look at all the threats, and we'll see how we can resource what we need to do and the services that our communities need and require, and we'll make our decisions there. I certainly did not instruct the CEO to look at specifically about pensioner discounts, nor did Councillor Reeves, so I want that comment struck from any record. We did not instruct the CEO to do that, and with saying that, Mr Mayor, this motion should be fully supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rottino. Right, councillors, I'll move this to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? So it's 4 to 3. We have Councillor Buckley, Councillor Ellison, Councillor Peltz who have voted against the recommendation. Thank you, Ms Collins. So now we'll move to item 4. This is a report on Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on the 22nd of October 2019 and Audit and Risk Committee Charter Review, which is also authored by Mr Cannizzaro. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak to item number 4. Item number 4 is the report on the Audit Risk Committee meeting held on the 22nd of October 2019. The committee on that day considered several audit risk matters, one of which was our internal auditor's presentation of their internal audit on our council management leases and licences. Also, the Audit Risk Committee reviewed the Audit and Risk Committee Charter, of which is appended in Appendix 1. Amongst other things, the Audit Risk Committee looked at the duties of the Audit Risk Committee and pared back or stripped back quite a lot of functions with respect to what they have in their charter and the workload that they have. And also looked at a draft work program, which is also included in Appendix 2. The Audit Risk Committee was also presented with the Victorian Auditor General Office report on local government performance around fraud and corruption control in local government. So council officers presented a gap analysis to the Audit Risk Committee. And the Audit Risk Committee also considered the Victorian Ombudsman report around and the IBAC report around special report on corruption risks associated with procurement in local government. So the recommendation to you today, councillors, is about noting the Audit Risk Committee report that in terms of their meeting held on the 22nd of October, and to adopt the draft Audit and Risk Committee Charter and Work Plan as provided in Appendix 1 and 2, which was supported at the Audit Risk Committee back on the 22nd of October. Happy to take questions.
Any questions, councillors? There are no questions, and Councillor Reeves has moved the recommendation, and Councillor Toohey has seconded it. Does anyone wish to speak? Would you like to speak to this recommendation, Councillor Reeves? Anyone else wish to speak? All right, councillors will put this to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, Mr Cannizzaro. This moves to item 5, which is our Limestone Road at Benambra, and we should have we're going to have Chris Field and Lou Wigg come forward to speak on this item. Thank you and welcome.
The road is named Limestone Road. Former council constructed Limestone Road through private person's property, and to rectify it, we're proposing to exchange an unused road reserve on the eastern boundary of the property for the area of the limestone road that traverses through the private property.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions to the officers? Good, all right. That's been moved by Councillor Toohey. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Buckley. Wish to speak to this, Councillor Toohey? Councillor Buckley, you may.
It's just very briefly, it's quite straightforward and what we needed to do, and it's been done. Thank you.
Well, I think we can put this to the vote. So all those in favour of this recommendation, it's a unanimous decision. Officers? Thank you. So that moves us to item 6, which is a proposed sale of council land. And again, we have Ms Wigg, and she will speak to this again. Thank you.
Back in August 2019, Council suggested or proposed that any properties that were surplus to Council's needs be identified for possible sale. A internal meeting group of managers, etc., got together and we identified the properties, and these 7 are the ones that have been determined that are surplus to Council's requirements.
Thank you. Council, is any questions on these, this list of 7 properties that you might wish to ask? That's all good. Could we please have... Yeah, that's what I did ask, Councillor Peltz.
Sorry, I do apologise. Thank you, Mr Mayor. So with regards to these properties, they'll go onto the open market and go be put through a real estate agent or something to that effect, or will they bid to be able to advertise them amongst the real estate agents? Can you just explain that side of what happens next if this is adopted today?
If this is adopted, the first process will be to obtain independent valuations to determine the market value, because we are, Council, are unable to sell any land that's less than the determined market value. And then once that's been determined, we will engage through a expression of interest process, land agents, real estate agents to auction the properties. There may be 2, maybe 3 agents will need to be involved depending on the areas, because it covers Lakes Entrance, Meetung and Swan Reach, and they may not be out of their each area.
Ms Wigg, I'd actually like to ask a question. If the sales go ahead, which part of our revenue office would these funds go to?
I'll have to look at the report. I did pop it in here. They all go into Council's operating budget, and they go against a surplus for that property, and then it goes into a discretionary reserve, and then it's a council decision of where the funds are spent from there.
Oh, thank you. Councillors, could we have somebody to move this? Councillor Rotino has moved it. Councillor Peltz has seconded it. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Rotino?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, I believe this may be an initiative that you first brought to Council when we first got elected, so it's good to see it progress to this point, and I just think it's really a no-brainer for us all to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Peltz.
I'd just like to say this is a great start to cleaning up some additional land that Council has acquired over the years that they're not actually using, and it's funds that are tied up unnecessarily. I presume there's probably some more in and around the place, but we haven't targeted them yet. Pardon?
So this is the first tranche.
Oh, great. This is the first of a few episodes. I presume that we're going to be looking at cleaning up some land that council actually owns that he isn't actually using, and they're just paying costs in slashing them. So they're actually costing us money. So it's unnecessary for us to retain it. They're not going to be developed into the future for any major purpose of, parks and gardens or anything to that effect. So with that stated, I'm pleased to be supporting Councillor Rotino and moving this motion forward.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz.
I'd just like to make a comment with those sort of things. They're really a liability, not an asset. So you get rid of them, and if we pick up a few bob on the way, well and good. Thank you. It'll be
Thank you,
handy
Councillor Buckley.
recommendation to save that 1 point something
We've,
million that we're looking for.
Just to remind you of something, we've gone past a few bob. We've gone to decimal currency now. So just to bring you forward. 21st century. So, councillors, I put this to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, this is item 7, and it's the Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation of Planning and Environment Act of 1987. I guess that's Mr Cannizzaro. It's all yours again.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll take the report as read, but you will note that the last time Council approved an Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation was at its meeting on the 6th of June 2017. We were well overdue for an update on our instruments. So given the personnel changes over the last couple of years, this report and its appendices reflect the instrument of appointment and authorisations with respect to our existing staff. And I present recommendations, 4 recommendations for Council to adopt. I'll take the item as read, and I'll maybe a few questions.
And Councillor Peltz has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Cannizzaro, just questioning, should the people that are listed on this agreement, should they become no longer employees of East Gippsland Shire Council, is it automatic that the person that fills that role takes up that position and therefore would be replaced on these legally binding moments?
So, under the planning, the authorisations under the Planning and Environment Act are to the individual, and so as someone steps in, as someone steps in and someone leaves, then a new authorisation is required for the new person. So, the delegations run with position, but appointments and authorisations run with the individual.
Can I just ask that, is there specific guidelines in the paperwork that states once they cease working employment with us that they are no longer able to sign on that behalf or fulfil that obligation?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Pals, we would take back their authorisation, which would then not allow them to enter premises, those sorts of things.
So immediate cessation on not fulfilling the role?
That duty.
Yeah, of that duty. Thank you.
I'll just first ask the other councillors, no more questions? Any more questions, councillors? All right. So it's been moved by Councillor Peltz and seconded by Councillor Rotino. So would you like to say any more, Councillor Peltz?
No, nothing other than it's just a paperwork thing that needs to be done.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. All right, councillors, I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So at this point, at 1:44 p.m, I would declare the meeting closed, and thank you, officers, for your attendance and support, and thank you, councillors.